It finally happened. Justin Bieber broke his silence about P. Diddy and revealed everything to the police. Last Monday, he gave a devastating statement to the police, where he recounted shocking details revealing the sexual abuse and crimes he allegedly suffered at P. Diddy's private parties. Among the most disturbing details, Justin describes what happened in the infamous dark room. He said that there was a place where innocence was destroyed and silence was bought. And to top it off, he released the names of Hollywood celebrities who were P. Diddy's associates in the crimes. And we had exclusive access to this testimony. In this video, we will read, word for word, the story that is shocking the world and is ruining Hollywood's reputation.
It was hard for me being that young and being in the industry and not knowing where to turn. And
Justin's testimonial started like that. There are moments in life where you question everything, your choices, the people you trusted, and the path you were forced to take. I was just a kid from a small town with a big dream. When I was discovered, I thought my life would be all about music, joy, and success, but nobody told me the price I would have to pay. I was only 15 when I entered this industry. Young, naive, and so eager to please. That's when I met him. P. Diddy, a giant in the music world, someone I admired and trusted. He said he wanted to guide me, to show me how to make it in this cutthroat business. At first, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was a legend, but I didn't realize I was walking into something far darker than I could have imagined. There was one weekend that still haunts me. He called it 48 hours of fun. I called it hell. I remember being whisked away to his mansion, surrounded by people I didn't know, music blasting, and things happening that no teenager should ever see. Drinks were offered. No, they were but pushed. People laughed like it was all a game. And me, I was just a kid, stuck in a world I didn't understand, with no one to protect me. Diddy had this way of making you feel special, but it came with a cost. He'd say things like, "This is what it takes to survive here, kid." Looking back, I know now what he meant. It wasn't just about surviving the industry, it was about surviving him. I wish I could tell you everything that happened. I wish I could scream the truth. But there are things too painful to put into words, things I've buried deep because I don't know how to process them. He told me not to talk about it, and for years I didn't. I was afraid. I still am. As I got older, I realized the extent of the manipulation. He wasn't a mentor, he was a predator. I see now how he used his power, his influence to control not just me, but so many others. It's sickening to think how many dreams were crushed under the weight of his games. I've spent years trying to move past the darkness, but every time I see his name in the headlines, it all comes rushing back. I can't unsee the things I saw. I can't undo what happened. But I can tell you this, the industry isn't what it seems. Behind the glitz and glamour, there's a side no one talks about, a side I was forced to live through. If you're reading this, I want you to know I survived. Somehow I made it through, but the scars remain. And to anyone out there chasing their dreams, I have one piece of advice. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone wants to help you. Some just want to use you. I was 15, just a kid with a guitar, a dream, and a whirlwind of excitement about making it big. The industry was brand new to me, a shiny, glamorous place where I thought everyone wanted to see me succeed. But looking back, I realized how dangerous it was to trust so easily. That's when I met him. P. Diddy was larger than life, a name everyone knew, someone I thought could open doors for me that I couldn't open on my own. He made me feel like I was part of something special. "You're the future, kid," he told me, flashing that iconic smile. And when he invited me to spend a weekend with him, just 48 hours, I thought I had hit the jackpot. Little did I know, those 48 hours would change everything. It started innocent enough, or at least it seemed that way. His team picked me up, took me to this massive house, more like a palace, really. There were so many people, models, musicians, people I'd only seen on TV. The energy was wild, chaotic, and honestly, overwhelming. Diddy greeted me like we were old friends. "This is going to be the time of your life, Justin. Trust me." I didn't know what to expect, but I trusted him. He was Diddy. Why wouldn't I? Then things got weird, really weird. There were parties, of course, but these weren't the kind of parties you imagine when you think of a kid hanging out with his idol. These were something else entirely. The drinks flowed freely, though I wasn't even old enough to legally have one. "It's fine," someone said. "Everyone starts young in this business." The music was deafening, the laughter fake, and the energy sinister. I remember being handed a drink and feeling like I couldn't say no. People were watching, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I didn't want to be that kid who ruined the vibe. But the drink wasn't the worst of it. The second night, Diddy took me aside. "You've got to understand this industry, Justin," he said, his tone shifting from friendly to almost threatening. "You've got to learn how to play the game." I didn't know what he meant, but I nodded, trying to seem like I understood. I didn't. What followed is a blur, people coming in and out of rooms, conversations that didn't feel right, moments where I felt trapped, but I didn't know how to get out. He made it seem like this was normal, like this was how stars were made. "You want to be a legend, right?" he asked. At 15, I just nodded, desperate to prove I belonged. Looking back, I can see how vulnerable I was, how easy it was for someone with power to take advantage of that. Those 48 hours weren't about music or mentorship. They were about control. When I finally left, I felt off, dirty, like something had been taken from me that I couldn't get back. I couldn't explain it, even to myself. All I knew was that I never wanted to feel that way again. For years, I buried the memory, convincing myself it wasn't as bad as it felt. But now, hearing the stories about him, seeing others come forward with their truths, I realize I wasn't alone. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern I was swept up in before I even understood what was happening. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that fame comes with a price. And sometimes that price is far too high. There's a lot people don't know about me, about what I went through to get where I am today. It's easy to look at the fame, the money, the success, and think it was all handed to me. But there's a dark side to this industry that no one talks about, a side I lived through and a side I've tried to forget. When I met P. Diddy, I thought I was meeting a legend, someone who could guide me, help me navigate the craziness of fame. He was larger than life, and I trusted him. I was young, too young, and I believed every word he said. "You're going to be a star, kid," he told me, but I didn't realize what that promise would cost me. The things I experienced during those early years are hard to talk about. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, haunted by memories I've tried so hard to bury. Diddy wasn't just a mentor. He was something else entirely. He had this way of making you feel special, like you were the only person in the room. But it was all a manipulation. There were times when I felt trapped, like I had no way out. He'd invite me to parties, events, places where I didn't belong. The people, the energy, it wasn't meant for a kid. But Diddy would smile, put his arm around me and say, "This is how legends are made." I remember one night vividly. It was a party at his mansion. The music was loud, the lights were low, and there were so many faces I didn't recognize. Drinks were being passed around, drugs too. People laughing, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that made you feel good. It was the kind that made you feel small. At some point, Diddy pulled me aside. "You're one of us now," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "This is how it works." I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I felt a knot in my stomach, a feeling that something wasn't right. What happened after that is hard to put into words. There are things I've never told anyone, things I can barely admit to myself. I was too young to understand, too scared to say no. He was powerful, untouchable, and I was just a kid who wanted to sing. For years, I stayed silent. I told myself it was just part of the business, that I had to suck it up if I wanted to make it. But the truth is, no one should have to go through what I did. No one should feel like they have to sacrifice their safety, their dignity to chase their dreams. Hearing the stories coming out about him now, it's like a wound being ripped open all over again. I see the headlines, the allegations, and I think, why didn't I speak up sooner? But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of what he could do to me, to my career, to my family. I wish I could tell you that I've moved past it, that it doesn't affect me anymore. But that wouldn't be true. The scars are still there, hidden beneath the surface. Every time I see his name, it all comes rushing back. The fear, the shame, the helplessness. If I've learned anything from this, it's that silence only protects the abusers. They rely on it, they thrive on it, and it's time we stop letting them get away with it. When you're 15, the world feels enormous. You're still figuring out who you are, what you want, and where you belong. For me, that journey was magnified 1,000 times by fame. Suddenly, I was living a life that didn't feel like my own, surrounded by people who said they cared about me, but often proved the opposite. That's when I met P. Diddy. Diddy was a force, a man everyone seemed to respect, admire, and fear. He made you feel like being around him was a privilege. He told me he saw potential in me, that he wanted to mentor me, to make me the biggest star in the world. At 15, how could I not believe him? But what started as mentorship quickly became something darker. He would host these parties. People in the industry called them freak-offs, but no one really explained what that meant, at least not to me. I remember being invited to one when I was still a teenager. Diddy said it was part of the lifestyle, something all the greats experienced. I didn't know what to expect, but I went because I trusted him. When I got there, it was overwhelming. The energy in the room felt wrong, suffocating. People were drinking, using drugs, and doing things I can't even begin to describe. The kind of things that make you question if you're even awake or stuck in some twisted nightmare. Diddy kept telling me, "Relax, kid, this is how legends are made." He laughed like it was all a joke, but I didn't feel like laughing. I felt trapped, like I couldn't leave, like saying no wasn't an option. At one point, he brought me into a private room. The details of what happened there are hard for me to talk about. I was young, confused, and scared. I didn't understand what was happening or why. All I knew was that it felt wrong, but I didn't feel like I could stop it. The next morning, I told myself it was nothing. I convinced myself that this was normal, that this was just part of being in the industry. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. As I got older, I started hearing more about those parties, stories from other people who went through similar things, who felt the same fear and confusion I did. It made me realize that I wasn't alone, but it also made me realize how deeply the system is broken. To this day, I don't know why he did it. Was it about control, power, or was it just who he is? I'll never know. But I do know that those parties left a mark on me, a mark I've spent years trying to erase. If there's one thing I want people to take away from this, it's that the industry isn't always what it seems. Behind the glamour and the success, there's a darkness most people will never see. I lived it, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I used to think the music industry was my dream come true. When I was discovered, everything seemed perfect. Millions of fans, hit records, sold-out shows. It was everything I'd ever wanted. But the truth is, behind the bright lights and screaming crowds, there was a darker side I wasn't prepared for. I was just a kid when I was thrust into this world, and I trusted the people around me. They told me they had my best interests at heart. "We'll make you a star," they said, but what they didn't tell me was the price I'd have to pay. When I met P. Diddy, I thought I'd found a mentor, someone who could guide me through the madness of fame. He was a legend, and he made me feel like I was part of something bigger. "You're special, Justin," he told me. "You're going to change the game." At the time, I believed him. But Diddy's world wasn't what I expected. It wasn't about music or mentorship. It was about power, control, and excess. He invited me to parties where the drinks never stopped flowing and the drugs were everywhere. At first I said no, I didn't want any part of it, but the pressure was relentless. "Everyone does it, kid," they'd say. "You got to keep up if you want to stay in the game." I remember the first time I gave in. It was at one of Diddy's parties. The room was packed with people I didn't know, but they all seemed to know me. Someone handed me a drink, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. So I took it, then another, and another. It didn't stop there. Soon, it was more than just alcohol, pills, powders, things I didn't even recognize. They told me it would help me relax, help me focus on my career. But all it did was numb me. Looking back, I realized that was the point. The drugs weren't just an escape, they were a way to control me. The more I used, the more dependent I became, not just on the substances, but on the people who provided them. People like Diddy. He made it seem like he was doing me a favor, like he was looking out for me. But in reality, he was using my vulnerability against me. There were moments when I felt like I was losing myself. I'd look in the mirror and not recognize the person staring back at me. I was angry, confused, and broken, but I didn't know how to stop. Every time I tried to pull away, the people around me would reel me back in. "This is the price of fame," they'd say. "Get used to it." It wasn't until I hit rock bottom that I realized I couldn't keep living like that. The drugs, the manipulation, the betrayal, it was all too much. I remember sitting in my room one night, feeling completely alone. I thought about everything I'd lost, my health, my happiness, my sense of self, and I knew I had to make a change. Walking away from that life wasn't easy. There were people who didn't want to let me go, who wanted to keep me trapped in that cycle. But I knew I had to fight for myself, for my future. It's taken years, but I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. If I've learned anything from this experience, it's that not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. In this industry, there are people who will do whatever it takes to control you, to use you for their own gain. But you don't have to let them. You can take back your power just like I did. It's not easy for me to talk about this. Sharing my emotions, my fears, my pain, it's something I've always struggled with. But there are moments when it all becomes too much, when it feels like the weight of my past is crushing me. That's why I posted those photos, the ones of me crying. I didn't think much of it at the time. I wasn't trying to make a statement or start a conversation. I was just overwhelmed. The memories, the shame, the things I've carried with me for so long. It all came flooding back, and for a moment, I couldn't hold it in anymore. When the photos went public, I didn't expect the reaction they got. Fans from all over the world reached out, asking if I was okay, speculating about what could have caused such a raw moment. Some people even said it might have something to do with him, with P. Diddy. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to admit that my pain, my tears, could be linked to the things I went through as a teenager. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized they were right. Diddy was one of the first people to take me under his wing when I entered the industry. He made me feel special, like I was part of something big. But as the years went by, I started to see that his intentions weren't as pure as I'd thought. There were parties, late nights, situations that no 15-year-old should ever be a part of. He'd tell me things like, "This is the price of success, kid," or "You've got to toughen up if you want to make it." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I just wanted to be good enough to make him proud. Looking back, I can see how manipulative it all was. He used his power, his influence, to control me. And when I tried to pull away, he made me feel like I owed him something, like I couldn't walk away without losing everything I'd worked for. Posting those photos wasn't about calling him out or making a statement about what he did, but I think deep down, it was a cry for help. A way of saying, I'm still carrying this. I don't know how to let it go. Hearing the allegations against him now, it's like ripping open an old wound. It makes me think about all the times I've stayed silent, all the times I've told myself to just move on. But how can you move on when the person who hurt you is still out there doing the same thing to others? I don't know if I'll ever be able to talk about everything that happened, to share all the details of what I went through, but I do know this: I'm not the only one. There are so many others who've been hurt, manipulated, and silenced by people in power, and it has to stop. If those photos showed anything, I hope it's that I'm human, that I've been through things most people can't imagine, and I'm still trying to figure out how to heal. I don't have all the answers, but I'm trying. And I hope that by sharing a little bit of my story, I can help someone else feel less alone. When you're young and hungry for success, you look up to the people who've already made it. You trust them, hoping they'll guide you, protect you, and show you the way. That's what I thought I had with P. Diddy, a mentor, someone who believed in me, someone who wanted to see me succeed. But as I've gotten older, I've started to question everything about that relationship. Was he really trying to help me? Or was there something else, something darker, going on? I met Diddy when I was just a kid, barely 15. At that age, I didn't know how the industry worked. All I knew was that he was a legend, someone who had helped so many others reach the top. When he put his arm around me and said, "You're going to be great, kid," I felt like I was on top of the world. But there were moments that didn't sit right with me even then. The way he'd make comments about teaching me the ropes or toughening me up. The way he'd always have me around even at events or parties that weren't appropriate for someone my age. There's one moment that still plays in my head sometimes. We were at a party and Diddy pulled me aside. He looked me in the eye and said, "You've got to understand how this business works, Justin. It's not all about talent. It's about who you know and what you're willing to do to stay on top." At the time, I didn't know what he meant. Now I wish I didn't. The older I got, the more I started to see the cracks in the relationship. Diddy's mentorship wasn't about helping me grow, it was about control. He wanted to keep me close, to make sure I relied on him, that I felt like I couldn't succeed without him. There were times I tried to pull away, to create some distance, but he always found a way to pull me back in. He'd remind me of everything he'd done for me, make me feel guilty for wanting space. "I'm the reason you're here," he'd say, and for a long time I believed him. Now, with everything coming to light about him, I can't help but wonder, was I just another pawn in his game? Was his mentorship just a mask for something more sinister? I've stayed quiet about a lot of this for years, partly because I didn't want to believe it, and partly because I was scared of what he could do to me, to my career, to my family. But staying silent doesn't make the pain go away. I wish I could go back and tell my younger self to be careful, to trust my gut, to ask more questions. But I can't. All I can do now is share my truth and hope it helps someone else avoid the same mistakes. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: not everyone who offers to help you is doing it out of kindness. Sometimes they're just looking for a way to control you. And it's up to you to recognize the difference. There's a lot I've stayed silent about in my career. Things I've experienced, things I've seen, and things that still haunt me to this day. People always ask why I don't say more, why I don't come forward with everything I know. But the truth is, sometimes silence feels like the only option. I met P. Diddy when I was just a kid. I thought he was someone I could trust, someone who wanted the best for me. He was powerful, successful, and everyone around me told me he was a mentor I couldn't afford to lose. At first I believed them. I thought he was opening doors for me, showing me the way to the top. But over time, things started to feel off. There were moments when I questioned his intentions, moments when I felt uncomfortable but didn't know how to voice it. I was young, and I didn't understand the weight of the situation I was in. There were parties where I felt out of place, surrounded by people much older than me, doing things I didn't understand. There were conversations that made my stomach turn, moments where I felt like I was being pushed into something I didn't want to be part of. But every time I tried to pull away, I was reminded of how much I owed him, how much he'd done for me. For years, I buried those feelings. I told myself it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that maybe I was overreacting. But as I've gotten older, I've realized how wrong it all was, and yet I still can't bring myself to say everything out loud. Why? Because the fear never really goes away. Diddy isn't just a person, he's an institution. He has power, influence, and a way of making you feel like you'll never escape his shadow. Speaking out against someone like that feels impossible even now. I've watched as others have come forward, as more stories about him have surfaced. And every time, I feel a knot in my stomach, a reminder of the things I've tried so hard to forget. I want to tell my story, but I don't know where to start. Part of me is scared of what will happen if I do. Will people believe me? Will it even matter? And part of me is scared of what will happen if I don't. How many others will go through what I did because I stayed silent? I've carried this weight for so long, and it's exhausting. The memories, the shame, the questions I still ask myself, they're always there, just beneath the surface. And every time I see his name in the headlines, it all comes rushing back. I don't know if I'll ever be ready to share everything. Maybe one day I'll find the strength to tell the whole truth. But for now, all I can do is take it one step at a time, trying to heal from the things I've carried with me for so long. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence can be its own kind of prison, and breaking free from it is harder than anyone realizes. When I think about the early days of my career, it's a mix of excitement and regret. I was just a kid with a dream, a guitar, and a belief that the people guiding me had my best interests at heart. But as I look back now, I realize that not everyone who helped me rise to the top did so out of kindness. Some of them, like P. Diddy, had their own agenda. Diddy was one of the first major figures I met when I entered the industry. He was larger than life, a symbol of success and power. People told me, if Diddy believes in you, you're going to be unstoppable. And I believed them. Why wouldn't I? He was everything I thought I wanted to be. At first, I was starstruck. He made me feel like I was part of something bigger, like I was destined for greatness. He'd say things like, "You're special, Justin. You've got something no one else has." Hearing that from someone like him felt incredible, but now I see how those words were used to manipulate me. Diddy's influence wasn't just about music or business. It was about control. He'd invite me to events, parties, and gatherings where I felt completely out of place. I was just a teenager, surrounded by adults doing things I didn't understand. Drinking, drugs, conversations that didn't make sense to me at the time. I remember one night in particular. It was a party at his mansion, and the energy in the room felt off. Diddy pulled me aside and said, "This is the life, kid. You've got to embrace it if you want to survive in this business." At the time, I didn't know what he meant, but now I wish I had run as far away as I could. That night I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't understand. The people around me weren't there to support me. They were there to use me. And Diddy? He was at the center of it all, orchestrating everything. For years, I carried the weight of those experiences without realizing how much they affected me. The drugs, the manipulation, the feeling of being used. It all became a part of my story, shaping the person I've become. I'll never forget the moment I realized I had to break free. It was late one night, and I was sitting alone, thinking about everything I'd been through. I felt angry, hurt, and betrayed. But more than anything, I felt determined to take back control of my life. Walking away from Diddy's influence wasn't easy. He made it clear that leaving his circle would come with consequences, that I'd be risking everything I'd worked for, but I knew I couldn't keep living like that. I had to choose myself, even if it meant losing everything else. Looking back now, I see how much his influence shaped me, not just as an artist, but as a person. It taught me how dark this industry can be, how easily people can use their power to exploit others. But it also taught me the importance of standing up for myself, of reclaiming my voice and my story. I survived, but I know not everyone does, and that's why I'm speaking out now, to let others know they're not alone, and that it's never too late to take back your power. It's hard to talk about this. Every time I try, I feel like I'm back in that place, young, scared, and completely powerless. People see the fame, the money, the screaming fans, and they think my life has always been perfect. But the truth is, the road to where I am today was filled with moments I wouldn't wish on anyone. When I was 15, the world was at my feet. I was living a dream, or at least that's what everyone told me. But behind the cameras and the adoring crowds, there were things happening that no one saw. Things I didn't fully understand at the time, but that still haunt me to this day. P. Diddy was one of the first powerful people I met in the industry. He was a giant, a man who seemed to control everything. I was in awe of him, and when he took me under his wing, I thought I was the luckiest kid in the world. He told me he believed in me, that he wanted to help me succeed. But as I got older, I started to question his intentions. There were parties, late nights, and situations that felt wrong, even then. Diddy would invite me to these extravagant gatherings, filled with people twice my age. The energy in those rooms was overwhelming. Drinks being poured, drugs being passed around, conversations I didn't understand. I remember sitting in a corner, wondering what I was doing there, feeling like I didn't belong. He had this way of making me feel like I owed him something. "This is how the greats are made," he'd say, as if enduring those moments was just part of the process. I trusted him because I didn't know any better. I was just a kid, and he was one of the most powerful people I'd ever met. As the years went by, I started to realize the impact of those experiences. The fear, the confusion, the feeling of being used. It stayed with me, buried under the surface. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my music, but it was always there, like a shadow I couldn't escape. The headlines about Diddy now, the allegations, it's like everything I tried to forget is being dragged back into the light. It's painful, but it's also a reminder of the things I never dealt with, the scars I've carried for so long. I've thought about speaking out before, about sharing my story, but every time I've tried, I've felt this overwhelming fear. What if no one believes me? What if it ruins everything I've built? And most of all, what if it doesn't change anything? I'm not the same person I was back then. I've worked hard to heal, to take control of my life and my career. But some wounds run deeper than others. They don't just go away, no matter how much time passes. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence only protects the people who hurt you. And I don't want to stay silent anymore. I don't know if I'm ready to share everything, but I know I can't keep pretending it didn't happen. To anyone else out there who feels trapped by their past, I want you to know you're not alone. I'm still figuring it out too, but I'm learning that it's okay to not have all the answers. What matters is that we keep trying, keep healing, and keep fighting for ourselves.